You think you know what humiliation feels like. A bad grade, a breakup, a job rejection. That's a paper cut. This was an amputation. Picture the glittering ballroom of the plaza in New York. Crystal chandeliers raining light on the city's most powerful faces. It was my mother's 70th birthday gala, a celebration of her life, her legacy, her impeccable taste. I, her only daughter, Elara Vance, 36 years old, had spent months planning it. I'd curated the menu, hand-selected the orchids, soothed the temperamental string quartet. I was the invisible architect of her perfection, as always. The toast was meant to be a daughter's loving tribute. I stood at the microphone, my heart a fragile bird in my chest, and began to speak about her strength. And then she glided up beside me, a vision in ivory silk, her smile a scalpel. She gently took the mic, her fingers brushing mine with cold finality. "Darling Elara," she cooed, her voice amplified, sweet as poisoned honey. "Always so earnest. You have your father's sentimental heart, and his unfortunate lack of timing." The crowd tittered politely. My face burned. She proceeded, for 3 endless minutes, to dissect my life as if it were a failed canapé. My quaint little art consultancy that barely paid its rent. My postponed marriage, a reference to my fiancé leaving me 2 years prior, a wound she'd salted ever since. My bohemian apartment in Brooklyn, a word she made sound like squalid. She framed it as concern, as a mother's loving worry, each syllable a nail in the coffin of my dignity. I stood there, frozen, a smile plastered on my face, tears of sheer, hot shame threatening to betray me further. I saw the guest's eyes, pitying, amused, dismissive. In that moment, I wasn't her daughter. I was her contrast, the dull backdrop against which she shone more brightly. The applause for her was thunderous. For me, there was only a vacuum of silence as I stepped back, my soul evaporating. She kissed my cheek, whispering just for me, "A little reality is good for you, sweetheart." The scent of her Chanel No. 5, once a comfort, now smelled of embalming fluid. And that was the moment I knew the real revenge begins now. The humiliation didn't end in the ballroom, it seeped into the limestone and marble of the city, a stain I carried home to my bohemian loft in Williamsburg, which suddenly felt not creatively cluttered but pathetically small. Vivienne Vance, my mother, was not just a socialite, she was an institution. Her taste dictated charity boards, her friendships moved markets, her disapproval could freeze a career in its tracks. My father, a gentle, bookish man who'd built a modestly successful publishing house, had been her quiet, adoring anchor until his death 5 years ago. I was there late, in life's surprise, a daughter who inherited his quiet soul and love for beauty, but none of her armored poise. I'd built a life curating art for private clients, finding meaning in the silent conversation between canvas and viewer. A world she viewed as a charming hobby for the unserious. That night at the plaza was merely the grand, public culmination of a lifetime of subtle erasures. But public erasure has a unique alchemy. It transforms grief into something harder, colder, more focused. In the days that followed, I moved through my life like a ghost, but a ghost with a newly ignited core of nuclear fury. I canceled my appointments, let the emails pile up. I sat in the gray dawn, light filtering through my industrial windows, and I replayed the scene not with the pain of the victim, but with the cold eye of a strategist. Her performance had been flawless, because it was built on a foundation she believed unshakable: her superiority, her control, my weakness. To break her, I would need to crack that foundation. I needed leverage, not a childish tantrum, not a screaming match. She would feast on that drama. I needed something that would silence the microphone forever. My first move was one of apparent surrender. I sent her a lavish bouquet of white gardenias, her favorite, with a note written in my finest, most subdued script: "Dearest mother, you were, as always, right." The clarity was painful but necessary. "Thank you, love, Elara." It was the verbal equivalent of a bowed head. I knew her vanity would read it as capitulation, and it would lower her guard. Meanwhile, I began the excavation. My father's estate had been a confusing affair. He'd left me his personal library, his first edition novels, and a small but meaningful trust fund I'd used to seed my business. The bulk of his publishing house, Penumbra Press, along with the majority of his financial assets, had gone to Vivienne. It had seemed logical at the time. She was his wife, the savvy business partner in public, though in private she'd always mocked the smell of pulp and desperation that clung to him. I'd been grieving, trusting, and utterly uninterested in financial battles. Now suspicion curdled that trust. I hired a discreet and expensive forensic accountant named Leo, a man who looked like a tired poet and worked like a bloodhound. I told him it was for personal financial planning, but my directive was clear. Trace everything related to my father's assets, from the 6 months before his death to the present. While Leo delved into digital graves, I turned my attention to Vivienne's world. I became the dutiful daughter again, but with new eyes. I accepted her invitations to tedious luncheons at the Colony Club, where I listened to her and her friends dissect people, with the casual cruelty of botanists pinning butterflies. I smiled and poured tea at her flawless apartment on Fifth Avenue, a museum of cold modern art and even colder sentiment. I noted the names of her lawyers, her financial advisor, her interior designer, her masseuse. I studied the ecosystem of her power. And I waited. My mother's one vulnerability, I knew, was her need for an audience. She held court. And when she held court, she talked. The key was to make her talk to the right person, in the wrong place. The opportunity came in the form of a family meeting she called at her apartment. My cousin, a vapid hedge fund manager named Julian, was there, along with my mother's sleek attorney, Robert Klein. The topic was the future management of a family charitable foundation, a foundation funded primarily with my father's money. I sat quietly on a Mies van der Rohe chaise, a notebook in my lap, playing the Chassson learner. Vivienne, holding a glass of chilled Sancerre, held forth. The foundation must reflect a more modern, dynamic vision, she said. Your father's focus on literacy was quaint. I'm thinking climate, women's empowerment, causes that get attention. It was a naked rebranding of his legacy into something that would polish her own. As the discussion grew more technical, Julian, eager to impress, began asking aggressive questions about asset liquidity. Robert Klein, a man with the oily calm of a reptile sunning itself, started discussing the legal steps to dissolve the old foundation's charter. And then my mother, perhaps feeling the Sancerre, perhaps feeling supremely untouchable, said the words that would become my arsenal. The beauty of it, she murmured, a conspiratorial smile on her lips, is that Michael never understood liquidity. He built that press like a castle, all walls and no drawbridge. It was a sentimental millstone. Selling it was the first truly intelligent thing I did as a widow. And funneling those assets into the new foundation structure, well, it's not just philanthropy, it's optics. A rebirth. His name fades, mine ascends. She glanced at me, a flicker of assessment. Alara understands, don't you, darling? Sometimes you have to prune the past to let the future bloom. I nodded, my face a mask of placid agreement, my hand resting on my open tote bag on the floor beside the chaise. Inside the bag, my smartphone, screen dark, was running a voice memo app. The tiny microphone, unobstructed, was drinking in every word. I let the recording run through the rest of the meeting, capturing Klein's legalese about bypassing old fiduciary guidelines and Julian's sycophantic agreement. When I finally stopped it in the silent elevator going down, my hands were trembling, but not from fear. From the pure, electric current of possession. I had it. Not just evidence of coldness, but of potential fraud. Selling it was the first truly intelligent thing I did as a widow. My father had been insistent, passionately so, that Penumbra Press remain independent, that it was his life's work, not an asset to be flipped. He'd told me this repeatedly. For her to sell it, against his stated wishes and likely against the spirit, if not the letter, of his estate planning, was a betrayal that went beyond money. It was the murder of his dream. And she'd confessed to it, casually over white wine. Leo the accountant's report arrived like a supporting chorus to my solo of evidence. The sale of Penumbra Press had been rushed, executed by Vivienne as sole executor, just 90 days after my father's funeral. It had been sold to a shell company for roughly 60% of its assessed value. That shell company, after a dizzying series of transactions, was linked to a private equity firm where my cousin Julian had quietly been made a junior partner. The money hadn't gone into a charitable foundation initially. It had circled through offshore accounts before a sanitized, smaller portion was donated to the new Vivienne Vance Foundation. The rest had seemingly evaporated. But Leo's arrows pointed to a series of luxury, real estate purchases in the Berkshires and Palm Beach. Properties held in Julian's name but gifted for Vivienne's use. It was a scheme of elegant greed. They hadn't just stolen my inheritance. They'd cannibalized my father's legacy, laundered it through layers of deceit, and used it to build a monument to her vanity. And they'd done it while casting me as the incompetent fool, unworthy of even a hint of the truth. The weapon was forged, but now came the art of its deployment. A direct confrontation would lead to denial, to better lawyers, to a brutal and likely unsuccessful legal war that would drain me and leave her reputation singed but intact. I wanted the same public reckoning she'd given me. I wanted the microphone turned back on her, forever. I crafted my plan with the precision of a jeweler setting a black diamond. The Vivienne Vance Foundation was hosting its inaugural, visionary gala, at the Museum of Modern Art. It was to be her coronation, the official transition from society wife to philanthropic titan. The guest list was a who's who of media, finance, and politics. It was perfect. The night arrived, a crisp fall evening, where the city lights glittered like shattered ice. The museum's atrium was transformed into a cavern of light and shadow, with large screens displaying sleek, abstract visuals representing the future. I wore a simple, severe black column dress, no jewelry. I was a shadow moving through her light. I saw her, resplendent in a gown of fiery crimson, holding court, the benevolent queen. She saw me and offered a faint, regal nod of approval at my appropriate attire. The humiliation at the plaza was now a fond, proven lesson in her mind. After dinner, she took the stage, the spotlight making her a radiant flame. She spoke movingly of legacy, of the courage to redefine oneself, of channeling resources toward a brighter tomorrow. She did not mention my father's name once. The applause was building to a crescendo. As it peaked, I did not walk to the stage. I walked to the main audio-visual control booth at the back of the atrium. A young, harried technician glanced at me. I handed him a pristine, labeled USB drive. "From Mrs. Vance," I said, my voice calm, authoritative. "The final video montage. She wants it played right now." He didn't question it. The rich were always making last-minute demands. As Vivienne stood, basking, preparing to wave her final thank you, the screens behind her flickered. The abstract colors vanished. Instead, the image was a simple, stark audio waveform, pulsing gently. And then, her voice, clear, unmistakable, filled the vast, hallowed space of the museum, amplified to resonate off every marble surface. The beauty of it is that Michael never understood liquidity. He built that press like a castle, all walls and no drawbridge. It was a sentimental millstone. Selling it was the first truly intelligent thing I did as a widow. And funneling those assets into the new foundation structure, well, it's not just philanthropy, it's optics. A rebirth, his name fades, mine ascends. The silence that followed was absolute, a physical weight. The waveform on the screen played on, now accompanied by Robert Klein's voice discussing legal maneuvers, and Julian's eager questions. It was a symphony of corruption. I saw Vivienne's face. The radiant confidence shattered, replaced by a primal, naked horror. It wasn't anger first. It was the terror of a creature whose protective shell has been instantly, publicly vaporized. She turned, looking at the screen as if it were a ghost. Then her eyes swept the crowd, finally landing on me at the back of the room. I held her gaze, my expression one of calm, detached observation, just as hers had been at the plaza. The room erupted not in applause, but in a deafening roar of whispers, gasps. The scraping of chairs as people stood to get a better look. Phones raised like a forest of recording eyes. I walked forward, through the parting crowd, until I stood at the base of the stage, looking up at her. I didn't need a microphone. The room had fallen silent again, waiting. You humiliated me to make yourself look taller, I said, my voice clear, and carrying in the acoustic perfection of the atrium. You stole my father's life's work to build yourself a pedestal. You thought I was too soft, too much like him, to ever fight back. I paused, letting the recorded confession still hanging in the air underscore my words. But you forgot what he taught me, Mother. He taught me to appreciate silence, to listen. And you never knew when to stop talking. I turned my back on her, on the ruin of her gala, and walked out. I didn't need to see the rest. The New York Post, the DA's office, the IRS, the social annihilation, they would all take it from here. The recording was out. A digital phantom she could never silence. Her response, as I stepped out into the cool, liberating night, was the sound of my own heartbeat. Steady and mine alone. The revenge was not in her arrest, though that would come. It was in the utter, irreversible destruction of the narrative she had built over a lifetime. She had tried to define me as a footnote in her story. I had rewritten the entire book. And on the final page, her voice was the only confession needed.